She is, perhaps, one of Starfleet's most controversial officers. And lover or hater, there's no denying, she had an indelible impact on not just the history of the Federation, but on the wider quadrant. Greetings, lore members, and welcome to this Dominion War special episode on Admiral Alynna Nechayev. Nechayev is actually quite an interesting case because her profile prior to the Dominion War is actually significantly larger than during the war, where she somewhat fades into obscurity compared to other figures who rise to prominence. In any case, we have an awful lot to get through. She had quite the impressive career, so without any further ado, we'll dive right in. So Alynna Nechayev was born in 2325 in Sarajevo, making her 10 years younger than Jean-Luc Picard. In terms of background, she actually comes from a Starfleet family. Her father and everyone on her father's side of the family for 5 generations have served as Starfleet officers. Her mother was a lawyer. She was the oldest of 4 siblings and thus found herself responsible for her younger brothers and sisters. It's likely that here she developed many of her leadership traits as she felt herself responsible for them. As well as that, she also became quite familiar with Starfleet from a very early age, moving starbase to starbase following her father, and thus when she turned 18 she signed on to Starfleet Academy as quickly as she could. She excelled at Starfleet Academy and was a very proficient sportswoman, particularly excelling in tennis and in fencing. She specialised in political history and studied the history of the 23rd century. She would graduate in 2345 with distinction. After that, her career is actually a bit of a blur because she joined up with Starfleet Intelligence. As one of the highest ranking of her class, Starfleet Intelligence was very quick to snap her up, and particularly with the skills that she had. Her first assignment as part of Starfleet Intelligence was to investigate and advise the Bajoran Underground, working with Key Falor. Her job in the Bajoran Underground was to gather intelligence not just on the Cardassians, who were of course a looming threat for the Federation, but also to make an assessment of the Bajoran Underground movement itself. Starfleet needed to assess whether or not it was worthwhile to sponsor these subversives in helping to undermine the Cardassian position on Bajor. Ultimately, Starfleet decided against sponsoring the Bajoran resistance because they were simply too radical for Starfleet's taste. There were too many extremists in there, and particularly if it came out that Starfleet had been sponsoring them, then the Federation would be brought into disrepute. And particularly considering that no one had any idea that the Bajorans would actually be successful in driving off the Cardassians, it seemed like a bad bet. However, Nechayev very much felt that they should supply the Bajoran resistance. She saw firsthand just how dedicated and devoted they were to their cause, and how relentlessly they fought, and she had no doubt that they would eventually liberate their world. It just required Federation support, but at that point the Federation was not willing to give such support. So in many ways she actually felt quite betrayed by the Federation Council's decision and was somewhat disenchanted with the higher-ups in the Federation and in Starfleet Command. By 2351 she achieved the position of Commander. This is likely due to her serving in Starfleet Intelligence. It's very likely that actually when she left the Academy, she immediately gained the rank of Lieutenant Junior grade because of her high marks. And then serving in Starfleet Intelligence acted as something of a fast-tracked promotion. She was then sent out to the Ganymede colony. What exactly she was doing there is unclear. It perhaps suggests that she may have fallen out of favour with the higher-ups at Starfleet. This might be because she so vehemently protested to Starfleet refusing to support the Bajorans, and she was therefore chastised and reassigned. However, her disgrace and exile would not last for long. At this point, the Cardassian border war was kicking into a higher gear, with the Cardassians deploying new warships to their frontier. Nechayev was given command of the USS Boudica, a Springfield-class vessel. The Springfield class is not a particularly formidable warship. It more serves as a sensor platform. It's basically an AWACS ship, for want of a better term. However, Nechayev then proved herself instrumental in detecting the Cardassian attack on Minos Corva, and she was able to slow down the Cardassian forces with her squadron of Springfields, slowing down the Cardassians, while the main force consisting of ambassadors and Excelsiors prepared in the system. For this gallant act, Nechayev gained a field promotion to squadron commander and proceeded to serve with distinction, and as a result of these successes against the Cardassians, she saw numerous rapid field promotions, and eventually, because she was so willing to take control of the situation in the borderland, and with the intelligence gained by her Springfield squadron, she was more than able to suggest plans of attack and response to Cardassian aggression. And this ultimately demonstrates a key part of Nechayev's personality, that she is very, very capable of taking control of the situation. Again, this likely goes all the way back to her upbringing, that she was expected to be responsible, but it's important to note that she never did so above her station. She was never a hotshot who went above and behind the back of her senior officers, but wherever the opportunity presented itself, she would always make sure to offer up a plan of action. However, a result of this was that she developed a very hawkish attitude, a strike-first attitude, leading several campaigns against Cardassian shipping, incredibly successful campaigns, but incredibly controversial. And in 2360, she was promoted to Vice Admiral, forcing her to then take a desk job at Starfleet Command, meaning that she was effectively reassigned, although this was hardly a reversal in her career overall, but at the time she felt that she had basically just been shanghaied out of her position in preference for someone more politically favourable like Admiral Nakamura. Of course, we all know that later on the Cardassians would gain a stronger position in the border wars, eventually fighting Starfleet to a comparative stalemate, demonstrating that if Starfleet wanted to continue with this war, they were going to need to dedicate more resources than they previously had, and that was not something Starfleet was willing to do. As a result, the Cardassians were able to negotiate a favourable armistice. Nechayev herself opposed the armistice, but when it was signed, she stood by it. She felt that it gave away too much, and essentially, if she had been allowed to stay there, the Cardassians would not have seen that upward turn in their fortunes that allowed them to negotiate from a comparative position of strength. As a result, she came to distrust more diplomatically minded officers like Captain Picard and Admiral Nakamura. Instead, she actually came to respect more realpolitik officers like Captain Jellicoe. Even though Jellicoe was one of the officers who helped negotiate the armistice, she actually initially, after some very rough early encounters, the two actually came to respect one another, as Jellicoe, as I say, is more of a realpolitik officer and actually understood and respected Nechayev's more proactive and hawkish views. What this ultimately shows us is that Admiral Nechayev was a woman of strong conviction, but regardless of what her convictions were, she would always carry out her duty, and this becomes abundantly clear with the Maki crisis. Going into the 2370s with the implementation of the armistice and the trading of various systems from Federation to Cardassian and from Cardassian to Federation control, there are of course a number of people who are effectively displaced by this. This is ultimately of course what results in the Maki Conflict. Admiral Nechayev oversaw the border region during the Maki Conflict because of course she had the most experience operating there. Regardless of her personal feelings regarding the armistice, she nonetheless saw the Maki as criminals and terrorists. She very much had a legalistic perspective on the matter and believed that if these people felt like they could break one treaty, what's to stop them breaking a whole slew of other laws, including the use of biological weapons, as it turns out. So in many ways, the later actions of the Maki vindicated Nechayev's position. And in her mind, it was very much a case of, well, she was willing to abide the treaty, and she fully understood the treaty, and she was a Starfleet officer who fought and shed blood during that war, so why couldn't these civilians? As far as she was concerned, the law is the law, and the treaties are binding. That very much put her at odds with other more hawkish officers, like, for example, everyone's favourite Admiral Pressman, who she didn't like. Nechayev was very much legalistic in her view, regardless of whether or not it did or didn't advantage the Federation. If it was not backed up by a treaty, if it was not instantiated in law, then what you were doing was wrong. Because of these views, she actually came to respect Captain Benjamin Sisko, although personally the two never really got on particularly well. There's no record of them having particularly warm interactions, but from a distance, Admiral Nechayev very much respected Sisko, particularly when he really went after the Marquis and Michael Eddington. And she actually continued to support Captain Sisko and bat in his corner going into the Dominion Cold War. She supported the more confrontational approach that Sisko spearheaded against the Dominion. She felt that it was important to project strength against the Dominion. That had been their failing in the Cardassian border war after all. They had failed to show the true strength of the Federation, and as a result ended up giving away too much in a bad treaty. So, as far as Nechayev was concerned, it was good that Sisko was being so confrontational with the Dominion. At the same time, during the Dominion Cold War, she pushed for more tactical training to be implemented in Starfleet Academy, and she also supported rearmament. However, she did fall into disagreements with other officers as to how rearmament should be implemented. We'll touch on that in a little bit. Now, during the Dominion War, she would come to command a heavy cruiser battle group in the First Fleet. This battle group included a full Galaxy wing and a full heavy cruiser wing, as well as a Excelsior wing and the USS Enterprise E, commanding from aboard one of the Galaxy-class ships, likely the USS Challenger, while Jellicoe commanded the cruisers from aboard the USS Zhukov, and of course Picard commanded his own formation from aboard the USS Enterprise. She would fight at the Siege of Vulcan. She proved herself a capable battle line commander, but it wouldn't take long for her to further ascend the ranks, coming to command Fleet Group Center by 2375, in many ways reclaiming the post she had once held, that being the region of space that sits between the McAllister Nebula and the Badlands region. Control of the Central Front was absolutely essential to back up the Allied positions both in the Bajor sector and the Izar sector, and these were ultimately the two planned prongs of the main invasion into Cardassia. Arguably, Nechayev was somewhat relegated to simply holding the line in this position, but in fact she would actually make it her own, and would command significant actions in the late portion of the war, and presided over one of the largest continuous fleet battles of the entire war, engaging all of the enemy fleets with all of her fleets in one long line spanning across several light years, which we may cover in a separate special episode in the future. Now, when it comes to her personality and doctrine, Nechayev is perhaps best described as a methodical commander. She preferred to remain in direct control of her fleet. She very much commanded from a big picture perspective, and as a result of this, she did not work well with Klingons. The Klingons, very individual in their approach to conducting a battle, and everyone basically flies off in a million different directions to try and find a weak point, and when they find that weak point, they all funnel right through it and just charge away. She didn't really like that kind of approach. She felt it was too risky. While she didn't work very well with the Klingons, she did work very well with her Romulan counterparts, who also preferred more linear and managed battles, largely because of the slow pace of their ships. Another aspect of her warfighting doctrine was that she was actually a technological elitist. Now, what does that mean? I've mentioned this before. Essentially, when we get to the latter half of the Dominion War, we're seeing more and more of these more advanced vessels, like the Saber class, like the Akira class, the Interceptor class, all these newer, more advanced vessels that are coming out. And Nechayev's view is that what Starfleet should be doing is concentrating these ships into spearhead formations, essentially elite fleets that entirely consist of the latest and greatest vessels, and they should use these as vanguard formations because their technological superiority will simply overwhelm any Cardassian or Dominion force that's put in front of them. And they can simply smash through the enemy lines, and then it doesn't matter that the rest of the fleet is still using Excelsiors and Andor Mark IIs and other such vessels. And in that way, she actually butted heads quite frequently with Admiral Ross, who was a technological Democrat. He believed in spreading these ships out among the wider fleet and to slowly bring up everyone's capability until you achieved a total advantage across the entire front. To conclude, Nechayev is perhaps one of the most controversial figures in the Federation, which, given the history of other admirals, is not entirely fair. Nechayev never broke any laws and never disobeyed an order. It's arguable that Nechayev came to be the face of the cold and calculating bureaucracy of Starfleet. During the war, she would participate in a debate with an anti-war activist, and while in many ways that did help argue the legitimacy of the war, particularly early on, where people in the center of the Federation didn't even know what a Dominion was, really, and so she made the case very clear. To some people, she was the face of cold, calculating bureaucracy and realpolitik. To others, an iron-willed military commander, and to others still, a bureaucrat who's simply a cog in the machine. But really, who is Alynna Nechayev? When we put aside Admiral Nechayev, who is Alynna Nechayev? She's an idealist, albeit a cynical idealist. She believes in the Federation wholeheartedly, there's no doubt of that. And critically, unlike others who perhaps believe in the spirit of the Federation, she doesn't trust such things. Instead, she puts her faith in the institutions and laws of the Federation. That's what she believes in. She believes that the Federation can only survive by it sticking to its institutions and its history. As far as she is concerned, people are weak, individuals are weak, but institutions are bigger than any individual and are stronger than any individual, and it is through trusting in the institutions that the Federation will survive, not in heroic figures, but by standing by their principles, their laws, and their institutions. She's a child of Starfleet who recognizes that she is but a small part of its heritage and legacy, and in that way, she is actually quite a humble person. She is not a hero, and she never sought to be one. She was just a loyal servant of the Federation. So thank you all for watching. I hope you enjoyed. Leave your thoughts in the comments below. What do you think of Admiral Nechayev? Has this video changed your mind about her at all? Or do you still stand fast to whatever your view was? Let me know in the comments, and we'll see you all next time.